Today, we begin our study of some Nikaya texts. For today's introductory lesson, we will provide a general overview of the Nikaya scriptures. Next time, we will delve into each specific text. Before we begin, I'd like to ask, are the old homework assignments finished yet? Yes, teacher, they are still taking shape, which means they aren't finished, because I had my doubts. For today's lesson, I have not given any new homework to give you venerable monks another 2 weeks, right? You venerable monks, next time I will collect the assignments. Remember to type them on a computer carefully and try to work collectively. This morning, I spoke with the venerable nuns about this. I said, for example, a person who is skilled will have ideas and take notes. But if, for instance, one's own contribution is weak, one can still cultivate a mind of appreciative joy, mudita. We can wash the clothes for our skilled spiritual brothers, bring them water to drink, or stand and fan away the mosquitoes while they work on the assignment. In doing so, we also gain merit and cultivate a wholesome mind. So, working collectively is for training in precisely that way, training the mind of appreciative joy and mutual support. Whether one has great ability or little ability, it is all perfectly fine. As for the person who is capable, they should be diligent and work for their teammates, but without a mind of arrogance. This means they still love and cherish their weaker spiritual brothers. When working collectively, it is just like that. We support the weak and the less capable so we can all accomplish the common task together. There should be no division, jealousy, or arrogance. From now on, you venerable monks must practice this way. All major assignments will be done together. The small assignments will still be done individually, but the major ones will all be done collectively like this so you can get used to the way great Buddhist work will be done in the future. Now, let's talk a little about the Nikāyas. To be honest, assigning me to teach the Nikāyas is perhaps not the most fitting choice because I am not an expert in this area. But the truly skilled teacher, the most venerable Vingyak, is busy teaching other subjects. The venerable monks on the school's managing board were so insistent that I felt I should try to be pliant and obedient. Since I happened to have recently taught the lesson on pliancy, I too had to be pliant and obedient. However, I made a promise that later, if other venerable teachers like Venerable Vingyak are free, he will correct any places where I have spoken wrongly. He will fix it. Therefore, as you venerable monks study this subject with me, please do so with a healthy sense of doubt. Always ask yourselves, is what he's saying correct? Always wondering, always reminding yourselves in your hearts, is he speaking correctly? So, the Nikaya scriptures were written in the Pāli language. They are the scriptures of Southern Buddhism or Theravada. Their origin is Sri Lanka, and they are considered the original scriptures of Buddhism. This means that these very discourses were authentically spoken by the Buddha. This is beyond doubt. Historians around the world, when researching Buddhism, must all affirm one thing. These are authentically the teachings of the Buddha. Over the thousands of years that have passed, it is true that many unfamiliar discourses have entered Buddhism, discourses that were not spoken by the Buddha but were written as if the Buddha spoke them. In reality, they were not spoken by the Buddha. These scriptures of the Southern transmission, however, were certainly spoken by the Buddha, although they have undergone a few transformations because when something is spoken and retold, it can never be perfectly accurate. At that time, when the Buddha gave a Dharma talk, his voice was powerful, gentle, decisive, and compassionate. Those special qualities in the Buddha's language entered people's hearts, making it easy for listeners to remember. This is a very special thing. For example, I have just spoken a few sentences, and you venerable monks, hearing them briefly, might remember the general idea. But if the Buddha had just spoken those same sentences, almost all of us would remember everything. It is not because we are brilliant, but because the Buddha's language is special. The Buddha's voice enters our hearts, passes through our ears, and is etched there tightly, each and every word recorded securely. So this is what is special. And for a long time, the Nikaya scriptures were only remembered, only transmitted orally. They were not written down in the first few hundred years. The first council was held 100 years after the Buddha's parinirvana. Later, the elder Yasa held another council. Then, 100 years after that, King Aśoka organized yet another council. It wasn't until the time of King Aśoka that the Nikaya scriptures were finally recorded in the Pāli language. This oral transmission could, over a long period, have given rise to some alterations. That is a matter of course. However, the alterations were not very significant. A sociologist once conducted an experiment like this. He told a short story to the first person in a line. He said that a girl was walking along a deserted road and met a man, and that man said something to her. Then, he asked the first person to pass the story on by whispering it into the ear of the second person. The second person then repeated it to the third and so on just by word of mouth. By the time the 50th person recounted the story, it was completely different from the original. The story the 50th person told was that a girl went into a forest, was attacked by a robber, and then she saved someone and so on. It had become a thrilling, horrifying tale that could be made into a movie. The reason for these later additions and embellishments is unknown. So, from the time of the Buddha, he spoke, he taught, and his words were transmitted orally and memorized. One person passed it to the next, and one generation passed it to the next. It is possible there were some changes. However, they were not excessive. Therefore, we still consider this Nikaya system of scriptures to be authentic scriptures that are truly the words of the Buddha's teachings. As for some Mahayana sutras, historians have compared them and seen that they were not spoken by the Buddha. For example, the Vimalakirti Sutra. The Vimalakirti Sutra is part of a system of scriptures written in Sanskrit, which is different from Pali. It is a sutra from the northern transmission, written in Sanskrit, and from Sanskrit it was translated into Chinese characters. Pali, on the other hand, is the language of the scriptures that Sri Lanka has preserved to this day. Let's take the example of the Vimalakirti Sutra. In it, the main character is an elder named Vimalakirti, who was extremely famous in the city of Vaisali. He was famous and brilliant, more brilliant than all of the Buddha's disciples, and yet he was just a layman. When I first read this sutra, I was astonished. I thought, if there was such a famous elder, why do none of the other sutras ever mention him? I was surprised. Later, when I read the research of world historians, I learned that this sutra appeared 700 to 800 years after the Buddha. That's when this sutra emerged. So that is the reason why this elder is never present in any other scriptures. Because if he were truly a person from the Buddha's time, then this sutra might mention him a little, and that sutra might also mention him a little. They are real historical figures. For example, the female lay disciple Aśoka was a real person in the Buddha's time, so sometimes this sutra mentions her briefly, and in another sutra we meet her again for another brief mention. We see that people who were real in the Buddha's time appear sporadically here and there. As for people who are not real, they might be mentioned in one sutra, but other sutras will not mention them at all. People know right away that the sutra was composed by someone later on. This is a truth that is sometimes a bit painful in Buddhism, but we must accept it. Buddhism is the path of seeing things as they are. Whatever is the truth must be acknowledged. And today, in the light of history and science, we are compelled to reevaluate. What is right, we must call right. What is not right, we must call not right, even if doing so causes us pain to our very core. Things that we once deeply believed in, things we revered, are now shown to be untrue. It is not as we thought. We must accept it, even if it is painful. When I first heard historians analyze that such sutras were not spoken by the Buddha, my whole being went numb. But then, because the spirit of a Buddhist learner is to learn the truth, I was forced to accept it. I just had to accept it, and I had to study it. Now let us study the Pali language a little. Initially, the scriptures were transmitted orally, not written down. Writing at that time was a luxury. Only the idle and very wealthy learned to write, and they belonged exclusively to the Brahmin caste, who learned it to chant the verses of their Vedas. Writing in those days was a very complex art. For that reason, the Buddha sometimes criticized those who were overly engrossed in the written word. There was no paper yet. They wrote on bamboo slips, clay tablets, and so on. Writing was very difficult to learn, and if one were to teach using writing, many people would remain ignorant. If you carried a pile of bamboo slips, announced, "These are the Buddha's words," and handed everyone a bundle to take home and read, no one could read them. So the best way was simply to memorize. The person before remembered and told the person after. The person after tried to remember and told the next person. So the method of learning at that time was this. In the afternoon, as evening descended, the monks would light an oil lamp. In those days there was no kerosene, just cooking oil or some other oil. The teacher would sit on a platform in the full lotus position. The disciple would be squatting on the ground. The teacher would chant a passage, and the disciple would chant it back. Thus have I heard. At one time the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajagaha, in the park of Anthapika, together with a great Sangha of bhikkhus. He called the bhikkhus to him and said this, and then he would have the disciple chant it back. If the disciple chanted it incorrectly, the teacher would correct him. After chanting it 2 or 3 times until it was memorized, he would move on. The Buddha told that bhikkhu, "O bhikkhus, in the world there are 4 things called the 4 sublime dharmas. The first is what? The second is what? The third is what?" He would chant it again. The disciple would chant it back. When the teacher heard that it was correct, he would give another passage. It was all memorization. After the teacher had taught half a sutta or a whole sutta, the novice disciple would hurry back to the main hall and start chanting continuously, just standing there chanting and chanting. That is why in Buddhism we have the tradition of chanting suttas, to remember, because if you don't remember, the scriptures are lost immediately. Once the teacher dies, the scriptures are lost. So chanting in the old days was for the purpose of preserving the Dharma treasure. The merit was immense. But nowadays that is all gone. Today the scriptures are all printed. So even if we forget, the Dharma treasure is still preserved. The merit of preserving the Dharma treasure now belongs to the people who print and sponsor the suttas. No one memorizes them anymore. But in the old days they had to chant to memorize. So the ritual of chanting in Buddhism is different from other religions. Other religions do not have such a vast treasury of Dharma as Buddhism does. They only have short scriptures, and their rituals are mainly prayer. They would just kneel down to pray, perform ceremonies, give holy water, drink holy water, and so on. They don't chant much. Only in Buddhism is there a tradition of chanting long suttas. Chanting this collection and that collection comes from the ancient practice of chanting to memorize and preserve the Dharma treasure. So the merit was very great. But in this era, if we also chant long suttas, it's a bit outdated. They chanted at length in the old days to remember the sutta, so it would not be lost. If we chant at length today, the meaning is a little off the mark. So it was all transmitted orally, without using writing. However, there is this one question. A doubt remains, what language did the Buddha use when he taught the Dharma? At that time, the Indian subcontinent was vast and divided into many small kingdoms. Our Buddha was born in the northeastern region, which is now Nepal. He belonged to the small kingdom of the Saka clan, Sakya in Sanskrit, Saka in Pali. This small kingdom was subordinate to a larger kingdom, Kosala. So between Kosala and the small Saka kingdom, there were blood relations. They would marry their children to one another to maintain alliances. There were a few other small kingdoms subordinate to Kosala. Below Kosala was another large kingdom, Magadha, and below it were more subordinate kingdoms. The king ruling Kosala at the time was Mahakosala. Maha means great. After King Mahakosala died, he passed the throne to King Pasenadi. When King Pasenadi died, he passed the throne to his son. We should remember this lineage, as it contains a painful story about King Vyabha. And remember, it was this King Vyabha who led his army to wipe out the Sakya clan when he ascended the throne. The era when King Pasenadi ruled. Kosala was a golden age for the Buddha. The king and the Buddha were like close friends, both disciple and friend, as they were around the same age. He strongly supported the religion when he came to power. but for some unknown karmic reason, he was eventually usurped by his son. One day, he went to speak with the Buddha in the monastery. Out of respect, he left his shoes, sword, and royal seal with a guard outside. This guard harbored treacherous thoughts, took the seal and sword, gave them to the prince, and fled. When the king finished his conversation with the Buddha and came out, everything was gone. No attendants, no sword, no seal. He rushed back to the city, but the gates were barred. The kingship now belonged to Vyabha. At that point, he fled to Magadha, where he also had family relations. He went to stay with his nephew, Ajatasattu, who had also ascended the throne. Ajatasattu cared for him until he fell ill from sorrow and died. After everything had stabilized and his power was secure, Vyabha led his army and wiped out the Sakya clan. The land of India at that time had many small kingdoms. It has been recorded that there were over 200 distinct dialects in India. For a long time under British rule, Indians spoke English, but local languages persisted. After India declared independence, they chose Hindi as the common language for the subcontinent. So, this is the problem. When the Buddha traveled from tribe to tribe, from village to village to teach the Dharma, what language did he speak? To this day, no one has found the answer. We could hypothesize that he learned many languages as a child, but this is not very reasonable. Who would have the time and leisure to learn so many languages? Even in the palace, though he was brilliant, it would have been difficult to devote time to that. Another hypothesis is that he had psychic powers. Wherever he went, he could quickly understand the local language and teach in it. This is a belief in psychic powers, so we can only take it on faith. A third explanation is that he taught in some common language, but it could not have been the language of his homeland, Kapilavatthu, because people elsewhere would not have understood. He had to speak their language. But how he could travel so widely and know all the languages remains a question, a doubt that persists. To this day, it was not until the Third Council, organized by King Aśoka, 200 years after the Buddha's parinirvana, that the scriptures began to be recorded in Pāli. At that time, King Aśoka saw, "My goodness, how can Buddhism have so many sects? This one says one thing, that one says another, no two are alike, and sometimes they even oppose each other." His resolve to protect the Dharma was very strong, so he decided to hold a council one more time. He was a man of great merit, King Aśoka, as we know. By then, writing had become more common, with perhaps 1/5 of the population being literate. So he decided to have the scriptures written in Pāli. I think there was probably no paper then. They wrote on palm leaves or something similar. The Pāli script likely belongs to the same system as Sanskrit. Its shape is what we might call worm script, similar to the Khmer alphabet. I'm not an expert on these scripts, so don't ask me for details, as one would need a doctorate to truly know them, but the shape is roughly like that. The Pāli script's writing style is in the same family as Sanskrit, Thai, Burmese, Khmer, and Lao. To the northwest, the Arabic script is a different system, but the scripts from Pāli to Khmer all have that similar, flowing, worm-like appearance. To this day, the Pāli script has been transliterated into our Latin alphabet, ABC. This was accomplished by the Pāli Text Society. They took the texts written in the old script and rewrote them in a Romanized Pāli so the whole world could read it. The pronunciation is a bit different, and though we tend to read it the Vietnamese way to make it easier, the actual pronunciation is quite complex. At that third council, one of King Aśoka's sons who had ordained, Prince Mahinda, accomplished a truly great feat. He ordained as a bhikkhu, practiced diligently, and was ordered by his father, the king, to lead a missionary group to Sri Lanka. At that time, to the south of India lay the island of Sri Lanka. King Aśoka was the master of a vast empire, so when the son of an emperor led a delegation of monks, what was the attitude of that small island nation? They knelt down and prostrated in welcome, right? They wouldn't dare do otherwise. He was a prince, the son of an emperor, and he was bringing a profound moral teaching. So they spread flowers and knelt to welcome the entire mission. Immediately, they made Buddhism their national religion. The entire canon of scriptures was brought over to Sri Lanka, transmitted completely, without a single discourse missing. The fact that Prince Mahinda ordained and brought the entire Nikaya collection over to be propagated brought two great merits, two immense benefits to Buddhism. The first was to distinguish these original scriptures from the later Mahayana scriptures. Once the scriptures were brought to Sri Lanka, the monks there practiced diligently according to the Nikaya. Pāli. About 100 years later, some Sri Lankan monks returned to India for a visit. They saw that new discourses had appeared in India, different from the ones they possessed. They thought, there are discourses here that don't exist in the Pāli in Sri Lanka. So what did they conclude? They were as intelligent as any historian. They reached a conclusion in 2 seconds. It had to be concluded immediately. What was it? They concluded that those sutras must have appeared after the Buddha, which means they are not. Yes, you could be a historian. The conclusion was immediate, because from the time of King Aśoka's council, the scriptures had been brought over without a single volume missing, not one period or comma. So why, 100 years later, upon returning to India, did new discourses suddenly appear? It was certain that those discourses appeared after the Third Council, right? That's exactly right. That is why the monks in Sri Lanka held on so tightly to the Nikaya Pāli they had in their country. They did not allow a single comma or period to be added or subtracted. They did this to specifically protect the teachings of the Buddha, to prevent any more additions, distortions, or errors. From the time of King Aśoka, they held on tight. Meanwhile, in India, new sutras were gradually added. Every now and then, a new sutra would appear, written by who knows who, until one day there were even tantric texts with all sorts of mantras being chanted. So, the venerable monks in Sri Lanka calmly state that the entire Mahayana canon is external to the original teachings because it was written in Sanskrit, the language of the Brahmin clergy. The entire canon of Northern Buddhism is written in Sanskrit, which was also the language of the Brahmin class who specialized in chanting and practicing according to the Vedas. It's the same even now. There was a car mechanic who once asked me, "Venerable sir, what religion do you follow?" I said, "I follow Buddhism." He replied, But when I ask those other monks, the ones who wrap their robes differently, they say you venerables are Brahmins. From that time until now, it has been the same. Those monks protect the original teachings fiercely and consider Northern Buddhism to be a Brahmin heresy. So if one of you venerable monks meets a Theravada monk, and you join your hands, bow your head, and greet him in the spirit of the Dharma, he will likely just nod, smile, and walk away, because in his view, he is the Saga while you are a layperson from a heretical tradition greeting him. The greeting is fine, but he feels no need to return the gesture, because he believes he is a true monk of the Buddha's Saga, one of the three jewels. As for you venerable monks, they might call you shaven-headed Brahmin heretics. That is how we distinguish between the original teachings, Theravada, and the Mahayana. Today, people use the terms original and developed. The scriptures that gradually appeared after King Aśoka's time are called the developed scriptures in Buddhism. The Nikaya scriptures are the original scriptures. In the past, people sometimes used the term Hinayana, lesser vehicle, while the other side was Mahayana, greater vehicle. This terminology was a bit offensive to the neighbors, so now historians refer to this side as the original teachings and the other side as the developed teachings. In terms of schools, this side is called Theravada, the school of the elders. That was the first benefit. Preserving the Nikāyas allowed for a clear distinction from the developed Mahayana scriptures. Second, beginning in the 8th century, Muslim armies began to attack India, and by the 13th century, they had completed their conquest of the entire Indian subcontinent. Islam was that powerful, and another dark tragedy occurred. They killed all the Buddhist monks. Not a single one was left. The temples were demolished and burned. The scriptures were all burned, and the monks were all beheaded. That is the reason why Buddhism virtually disappeared from India. The Hindus, on the other hand, maintained a lifestyle that could blend in with the general populace, so they survived. But the Buddhists, with their shaven heads, alms bowls, and communal family-less lifestyle stood out distinctly from the Muslims and were easily identified. And when we constantly said there is no creator God, no Allah, they would hear that, get angry, and act immediately. So it was thanks to the scriptures being brought to Sri Lanka, across a sea, that the Nikaya Piyaka was not burned or destroyed. Its original version was preserved. That is the second great merit of Prince Mahinda for bringing the Nikaya Piyaka to Sri Lanka. These are two immense merits. More recently, around 1966, Mr. Rhys Davids and others founded the Pāli Text Society to transliterate the canon into the Latin alphabet. Currently, our Vietnamese Buddhist Institute and others around the world study the Pāli Suttas using this Romanized Pāli. However, the Khmer monks in the Tra Vinh province of Vietnam, to this day, still learn Pāli written in their traditional script. They don't learn the Romanized Pāli that we do. They write in that flowing, worm-like style. Every morning, if you go to a Khmer temple where they hold classes, you will hear them chanting melodiously in the Pāli language, written in the Khmer script. That is a brief look at the language. Now for the classification. First is the Dīgha Nikaya, the collection of long discourses. It consists of 34 long discourses. Dīgha means long. These discourses are very long. Then, the Majjhima Nikaya, the collection of middle-length discourses, contains 152 discourses of a medium length. Next is the Sutta Nikaya, the connected discourses. Sutta means related or connected. In this collection, each chapter discusses related topics. That is why it is called the connected collection. In the Chinese agamas, this is called the miscellaneous agama, because it seems to talk about all sorts of things, but in Pāli, the principle is connection. Then there is the Uttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses. This collection is organized by number. The Book of Ones is separate, the Book of Twos is separate, and so on. For example, any teaching where the Buddha discusses a single point is placed in the first book. Any Dharma talk where the Buddha discusses 4 points is placed in the 4th book. That is the arrangement of the Uttara Nikaya. It has 174 chapters in total, with 2,308 short discourses. Finally, there is the Khandaka Nikaya, the collection of minor texts. This collection includes many famous works. First is the Dhammapada, which I believe is in your curriculum. There is also the Sutta Nipata and the Jataka tales. The Jataka are stories of the Buddha's past lives. Many people suspect these stories were not told by the Buddha but were written by later people. They also suspect that even within the Nikāyas, there are discourses written by later people. The Jataka tales are a particular point of suspicion. But when I read them, I feel they were not entirely written by later people. During the Buddha's time, he did occasionally speak of his past lives. The number of such discourses may not have been very large, and later authors added more to create a full collection of 547 stories, which is quite an impressive volume. This collection also includes the Udana verses of inspiration, which are discourses the Buddha spoke without being prompted, and the Therigatha and Theragatha, verses of the elder nuns and monks. These are poems and verses spoken by the elders upon attaining enlightenment. In a moment of inspiration, they would compose a poem to express their insight. Usually, preceding the poem is a short biography of that arahant, how they were born and what they did. Some elders were born into miserable circumstances, and some had committed grave sins before practicing and attaining the path. But there were also elders born into ultimate glory who renounced a throne to ordain and attained arahantship in just a few days. One such case was Venerable Mahayana. He was a king, but when he encountered the Buddha's teachings, he was so deeply moved that he immediately led his retinue to find the Buddha. His faith was so powerful that the scriptures record this. He rode his horse to a river and declared, "If the Buddha is indeed the perfectly enlightened one, supreme as they say," then he vowed his horse would walk across the water. He spurred his horse across the river, unafraid of sinking, and with that intense faith, the entire troop of horses crossed the river. Their feet did not even get wet. The scriptures record it just like that. His faith was intense, his spiritual capacity of the highest order. When he finally met the Buddha, he shaved his head and ordained. 8 days later, he and his entire retinue attained arahantship. This is a very beautiful and extraordinary story. As for us, if we heard there was a Buddha on the other side of the river, we would probably wait for a boat to ferry us across. We'd be too afraid of sinking. Swimming would be too tiring. We'd just sit and gaze at the sky, waiting for the boat. But in those days, he was that intense. That is spiritual capacity. Then there is the Itivataka, as it was said, a collection compiled by a female lay disciple. This is also unusual, as most discourses were recited by Venerable Ananda at the first council. At that time, after the Buddha's passing, the Arahant Bhikkhus gathered, and Venerable Ananda recited everything he had heard and remembered for the other Arahants to verify. They verified it based on 2 things. First, their own memory. They confirmed, yes, these words are correct, the Buddha spoke them. And second, based on the doctrinal content, they saw that it was consistent with the truth. They themselves had realized. All 500 Arahants confirmed it. From then on, the teachings were memorized and transmitted orally. The spirit behind this was very special. Now let's talk a little about the meaning of the discourses. For the most part, they present the core doctrines of Buddhism, the 4 noble truths, the noble eightfold path, the 7 factors of enlightenment, the 4 immeasurables, morality, concentration, wisdom, the sense spheres, the 5 aggregates, mindfulness of breathing, contemplation of impermanence, the 4 foundations of mindfulness and dependent origination. These are the fundamental teachings. For example, there is a discourse on the extinction of craving, where the Buddha taught, consciousness has action, as its cause, its origin, the seed, its reason. Action has ignorance as its cause, its origin, its seed, its reason. Do you venerable monks understand that? You probably do, more or less. But the style of emphasis and repetition, repeated over and over, can become tedious after a while. That is a challenge with the Nikaya Suttas. The challenge is that after reading for a while, you get tired of them, because they just repeat again and again, repeat again and again. They had to be repeated again and again in order to be remembered, so the listener at the time could remember. You see, we are now studying the Vietnamese translation by the most venerable Minh Chau. But to read this style of writing can be very difficult. To take a passage like that and lecture on it, to chant it over and over, is almost unbearable. You get tired of it. It's the repetition. And many of the images and examples are very foreign to us. So we have to first understand them, and then explain them in the Vietnamese of today for this modern era. That is the difficulty. Remember, you venerable monks, what we are studying today is the Vietnamese translation. When you reach a higher level, you will study the Pāli text directly. But for now, we are studying the meaning. But we can't just stop there. We won't understand much, and we won't be able to explain it to others. We have to understand it in the language of today to make it feel less heavy. Reading that sentence from before feels very heavy. And in the old days, it was just repeated like that. And some images are so strange. Strange images we don't understand today. Then there are also discourses that arose from specific circumstances, from a dialogue with someone. The Buddha taught the Dharma in response, and his explanation was so brilliant that it was respectfully recorded and became a famous discourse. There are many like that. For example, there was a Brahmin Soṇadaṇḍa who taught his disciples that to guard the mind, the eye must not see forms and the ear must not hear sounds. One of them replied, then a blind person must be excellent at guarding the mind, because their eyes see nothing, and a deaf person must be excellent at guarding the mind, because their ears hear nothing. Just hearing that, people could see the flawed reasoning of that heretic. Or there was another discourse that arose from a specific situation. The Buddha met a famous Brahmin who came to see him, but he was extremely nervous. He was afraid the Buddha would ask him a question he couldn't answer, and he would be embarrassed. A whole delegation of Brahmins was following him, and he was a renowned scholar. He had heard that the Buddha was a perfectly enlightened one, and he admired him. There must have been some past karmic connection. But as he walked, his stomach was in knots. What if the Samama Gautama asks me a question I can't answer? That would be terrible. Or what if I ask a question that he scoffs at as being foolish? That would be terrible. He was nervous right up until he met the Buddha. After greeting him, he sat down. The Buddha read his mind. And so, the Buddha asked a question that was right in his area of expertise. How many qualities must one have to be called a true Brahmin? What are the standards? The man was overjoyed. This is my specialty. He sat up, stretched, cleared his throat, adjusted his robes and said, Venerable Gautama, there are 5 standards to be called a Brahmin. He then listed them. First, one must have pure Brahmin lineage on both the mother's and father's side for 7 generations. Second, one must be handsome and well-formed, perhaps as handsome as, or a little more or a little less. Then, you venerable monks here in this hall, but certainly not uglier. Third, one must have thoroughly memorized the verses and mantras of the Vedas. Fourth, one must be virtuous. Fifth, one must be wise. He presented 5 standards. The Buddha then said, Now consider this. Could one of these standards be removed, and that person still be called a Brahmin? He replied, Yes, Venerable One, we could remove the lineage. Even if we don't know who a person's parents are, if he is handsome, learned, virtuous, and wise, he can still be called a Brahmin. The Buddha asked, Now, could you remove one more? Yes, he said, and removed handsome appearance. Even if someone is as ugly as me, it is fine, as long as he is learned in the verses, is virtuous, and is wise. The Buddha said, Try removing one more. Yes, I can, he said. At this point, the other Brahmins started to protest loudly. Be careful, sir. You are falling into the Samama Gautama's trap. If you keep removing qualities, you will end up converting to his path. The lead Brahmin said to them, If you think you are more skilled than I, then you answer him. But if you have never been more skilled than I, then sit in silence and listen to my reply, because he was their teacher. He continued removing qualities until only 2 remained. As long as one has virtue and wisdom, one can be called a Brahmin. The Buddha accepted this, saying, Correct. And the Brahmin spoke a sentence so beautiful it was recorded in the scriptures, and the Buddha himself repeated it in praise of him. He said, Just as one hand washes the other, and one foot washes the other, so too is virtue purified by wisdom, and wisdom purified by virtue. Where there is virtue, there is wisdom. Where there is wisdom, there is virtue. He spoke so well. The Buddha repeated his exact words to praise him. However, when the Buddha then asked, But what is wisdom? The Brahmin did not know. At that point, the Buddha explained what wisdom is, and it became an entire wonderful discourse, expressing the path of practice for bhikkhus in Buddhism. And then the Brahmin asked to take refuge in the Buddha and became his follower. So you see, some discourses are like that. The Buddha wasn't presenting a standard doctrine. Rather, his reasoning in a specific situation was so brilliant it became a discourse. Similarly, the Upāli Sutta also arose from a particular circumstance. There was a disciple of the Dīgha sect. These are the followers of Nikaya Nadapada, sometimes called the naked ascetics. Their doctrine was actually quite profound, because their founder was a highly skilled spiritual practitioner who had attained a certain level of realization. However, within that realization, he still held wrong views. He was a contemporary of the Buddha, but it seems they never met, though their disciples often interacted. One day, a monastic disciple of the Nikāyas went to see the Buddha. They discussed the 3 kinds of action: bodily, verbal, and mental. The disciple argued that bodily action was the most significant. A mere thought is nothing, he said. Only when you physically strike someone does it become real karma. The Buddha, however, maintained that mental action, intention, was the most important. When this disciple returned, he went to the home of a wealthy layman named Upāli. This was not the famous Venerable Upāli, the foremost in the Vinaya, but a layman of the same name who was a devoted patron of the Nikāyas. The leader of the Nikāyas was present at the house. The disciple recounted his debate with the Buddha with great enthusiasm. Hearing this, Upāli volunteered to go and challenge the Buddha himself. The way he described it is strange to our modern ears. He said, "Venerable Nikaya, I will go to the Samamagadama, and like a skilled wrestler who grabs his opponent, seizes his robe, and throws him this way and that, pulling him back and forth with ease, so I will use my logic to make the Samamagadama fall this way and that, until he has no words left to respond." The ascetic who had just returned from seeing the Buddha pleaded, No, teacher, please don't let Upāli go to see the Samamagadama. He has a kind of charm. Whoever meets him ends up following him. Many disciples from other traditions have met the Samamagadama and taken refuge in him. Please don't let him go." But the Nikaya leader laughed. "Impossible. There is no way that Upāli will become a disciple of Gautama. It is more likely that the Samamagadama will become a disciple of Upāli, because Upāli was so brilliant. Encouraged by his teacher, he went to meet the Buddha and raised the same question about the 3 kinds of action. The Buddha asked him a simple question. If a person is walking down the road and accidentally steps on an insect, is that person's transgression heavy or light? Upāli replied, "Light." "And why is that?" "Because it was unintentional," he said. The Buddha replied, "Correct. It is precisely the intention, the mental action, that is most important." With one simple question that appealed to Upāli's own conscience, the Buddha made his point. He then asked a series of questions that clearly proved the primacy of the mind. Afterwards, Upāli said, "Venerable Gautama, from your very first question, I was already defeated. I only continued to raise other points so that you could make the truth shine even more brightly. Today, you have brought light to me, and I ask to take refuge in you." The Buddha then said, "You should consider this carefully. One should not be hasty." Upāli replied, "Never has a teacher, when someone asked to become his disciple, told that person to consider it carefully. This very statement, Venerable Sir, makes my respect for you grow even deeper." The Buddha then said, "But you are still a patron of the Nikāyas." Upāli was amazed. How extraordinary! Never has a teacher, when someone came to take refuge, reminded that person of their ties to their old teacher. Your hesitation, Venerable Sir, makes my admiration for you grow even deeper. The Buddha then said, "You have long been a generous supporter of the Nikāyas. From now on, you should continue to open your heart to them." Upāli praised him again. Never has a master, after accepting a disciple, encouraged him to continue supporting the followers of another path. What the Blessed One has said makes my respect for you grow even deeper. Just as one sets upright what has been overturned, just as one brings a lamp into a dark room so that people may see, so has the truth been revealed by the Blessed One. From this day forward, I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha, for as long as my life shall last. He then took his leave and returned home. He went to his gatekeeper and said, "From now on, the gate is closed to the Nikāyas. If any of them come, tell them I am no longer their disciple, but have become a disciple of the Samamagadama." When the Nikāyas came for alms, the gatekeeper turned them away. They reported this to their master, who came to see Upāli. Upāli invited him in and offered him food, but he confirmed that from then on, he was a follower of the Buddha. These stories are so specific and fascinating. The discourses based on standard doctrines can be difficult to listen to because they are so theoretical and abstract. They require someone to explain them carefully before we can absorb their meaning. Take the 4 Noble Truths. It is not so easy to understand. Realizing that life is suffering sounds simple, but it is not easy to truly understand. I once met a young man when I was a novice in the temple. He was a neighbor of my family and would come to the temple to listen to my teacher's Dharma talks. We were chatting and he expressed his confusion. "Buddhism says life is suffering," he said. "It sounds so negative. I just don't fully understand it." I told him, "This is a profound principle of Buddhism. It is not pessimism. It is wisdom. The day you can hold a stack of money in your hand and still see that this is suffering, that is the day you will understand Buddhism. The day you will understand the noble truth of suffering." To this day, I don't know if he has understood it yet. As for myself, I still haven't fully understood it either. Another characteristic of the Nikayas we see is this: because there were no means of recording like tapes or books, the Buddha had to personally repeat a doctrine many times during different Dharma talks. A single doctrine might be repeated several times within the same discourse, and the meaning of that discourse would be taught by the Buddha again and again in different places, because at that time, there was nothing to record it. Today, the Buddha might teach a discourse to 500 bhikkhus here. Then he might travel to another village and meet some lay people who have already attained the first fruit of stream entry. The Buddha would then teach that exact same discourse to them, and it would not feel repetitive at all because these new people had never heard it before. But today, I'm the one who has it hard. A discourse is taught, and it's recorded on tape. The next time I try to teach it, people will say, "Teacher, I've already heard this one on tape. Please don't teach this again." This is a real challenge for modern lecturers. When we study the subject of methods of lecturing, I will confide in you venerable monks about this difficult situation. For example, a core teaching is that we should not be selfish, but should orient our lives toward altruism. How long do you think it takes to master this practice? 10 years? A lifetime? For a great bodhisattva, maybe several lifetimes? There is no limit, right? You might not even finish in this life. So, if today I tell the lay Buddhists, go home and try to live altruistically, that single piece of advice should be enough for them to practice for the rest of this life and many lives to come. Shouldn't it? But does anyone agree to that? No. If they stop listening to Dharma talks, they will forget all about it. What was that altruism thing again? I remember the teacher saying something about it 10 years ago, but I've forgotten. They stopped practicing. But if they continue to listen to lectures, they will continue to remember to practice, to remember to abandon selfishness and cultivate altruism. Therefore, a lecturer must always have new discourses to teach, to keep the lay Buddhists engaged, drawn in and interested, and to continuously nurture their devotion to the Dharma. Nurture it with new, excellent discourses. And for what purpose? So that they will practice these very old, fundamental teachings. That is the great challenge. You have to find new and engaging material to teach over and over again. Why? So they will practice these ancient principles. If there are no new discourses, they will abandon the old doctrines. They won't bother practicing anymore. That is the reality. Teaching new discourses isn't because there's some new, better doctrine or because people have mastered the old ones and are ready to move on. Not at all. It's so that listening remains interesting, which in turn nurtures the devotion needed to practice the old doctrines. It's a difficult position to be in, especially in the age of recording devices. In the old days, the Buddha had it easy. There were no tapes, no recordings. He could teach a discourse in one place, go to another and teach it again. 10 years later, he could teach the exact same discourse, and it would be perfectly fine because most people had never heard it before. But now, with recordings, everywhere you teach something once and a few days later it's already in America. If you don't have something new, people get bored. And if you teach the old material, they say, "Oh, this is old already." And gradually they lose interest. It's a psychological phenomenon. I will discuss this more in the Methods of Lecturing course. Another characteristic of the Nikāyas is that, as we read them, the historical context gradually emerges. We come to understand the Buddha's era, how people lived, what their daily activities were, what wars took place, who the kings were. Everything slowly becomes clear. For instance, in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the discourse on the Buddha's final passing, the warlike king Ajatasattu was planning to attack the small kingdom of the Vajis to subjugate them. He sent a messenger to ask the Buddha if he should attack, if he would be victorious. He thought the Buddha, with his wisdom and psychic powers, would know everything. The Buddha did not answer directly. He simply turned to a bhikkhu sitting nearby and asked about the state of the Vajian country. The bhikkhu replied that the Vajis lived together like saints, peacefully, democratically, and united. The Buddha then said, with even one of their good qualities, they would be unbeatable. Since they possess all seven, they can never be defeated. The Buddha said that, and so King Ajatasattu called off the attack. It is by reading the Suttas that we see history gradually revealed. The stories I told earlier about the various clans are also things we learn from reading the Nikāyas. We also see many special characters: kings, ministers, the great disciples, lay devotees, wandering ascetics, both good and bad people. Everyone the Buddha interacted with gradually appears in the discourses. For example, the female devotee Visakha was a truly wonderful disciple. She was just a laywoman, but she served and cared for the Sangha with such devotion that she attained the fruit of stream entry. The Buddha cherished her greatly. Many times, while on his alms round, if he had extra time, he would stop by to visit Visakha and her family. She was that exemplary. Even today, if you venerable monks see a laywoman with such a good heart, who both practices well and supports the Sangha, people might say, she is the Visakha of our time. Then there are the kings like Ajatasattu, Pasenadi, and Bimbisara, who appear sporadically throughout the Suttas, and the great disciples like Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Moggallana. Their deeds and teachings also appear time and again. This is another characteristic of the Nikāyas. They paint a vivid picture of the true history of the Buddha's time. There is another thing: devas, beings from the celestial realms, frequently appear before the Buddha to ask about the doctrine. This is a common image. There is a very strange discourse called the Sakkapanha Sutta, the questions of Sakka. One time, the Buddha was dwelling in the Indasala cave. Sakka, the king of the Tvetisa heaven, wanted to pay homage to the Buddha. But when he looked down with his divine eye, he saw the Buddha was in deep meditation and could not be contacted. The Buddha's meditative state was deeper than all the heavenly realms, so they couldn't reach him. With shallower states of meditation, devas can approach and even speak to a meditator. But the Buddha's meditation was so profound it transcended the three realms, so there was no way for them to enter. So Sakka, king of the gods, sent a young Gandhaba, a celestial musician. What is a Gandhaba? Who remembers? A god of music, that's right. The devas in heaven also enjoyed parties with singing and music, and they would often invite this Gandhaba to perform. Sakka told this young musician, "Go and use your musical art to attract the Blessed One's attention. Once he emerges from his meditation, I can pay homage to him." So the young man went to the Buddha's cave, took up his lute and began to sing a love song of all things. He came to attract the Buddha's attention but sang a love song. The entire song, which is very long, is recorded in the Dīgha Nikaya, and its lyrics are incredibly bold, recording feelings of love and sensual desire with a raw intensity. There are lines like, "I want to sink into your breast," and another, "I love you as an arahant loves meditation." He sang his love song, but wove references to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha into it. He became so engrossed in his singing that even the Buddha was amused. The Buddha turned to him and asked, "Where did you get this song?" He replied, "Blessed One, I am in love with a certain Gandhabi, a female musician, but she doesn't love me. She loves another man. So I composed this song about my love for her, but I included praises of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And because I praised the three jewels, she softened her heart and agreed to go on a date with me. It was hilarious." After that, Sakka, king of the gods, appeared and paid homage to the Blessed One. The cave wasn't very large, but countless devas stood packed inside, yet there was still enough room. This was due to the psychic powers of the Buddha and the devas. The cave lit up so brightly that the villagers on the mountainside thought, "The mountain is on fire," but it was just the radiance of the devas. The later part of that discourse is excellent, as Sakka describes his work and the way things are done in the heavenly realms. So if we study it, we learn more about the heavens. But that first part is a bit difficult to get through. Another characteristic we see throughout the Nikāyas is this. When first teaching someone, the Buddha almost always speaks about karma, cause and effect, and morality first. He never teaches higher-level doctrine until the person's mind is ready and receptive. Only then does he teach about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path so that person can practice and attain the path. This was the Buddha's skillful and necessary approach. And sometimes, he could guide a person through both stages in a single Dharma talk, leading them to attain the path right on the spot. A person with great spiritual capacity would come to the Buddha, and during their conversation, the Buddha would teach about karma. As he taught, the person's mind would become receptive, and the Buddha would then shift to the Four Noble Truths. By the end of the talk, that person would attain the first fruit of stream entry. In other cases, the Buddha would only teach about karma and send the person home to practice as a layperson. After practicing for 3 or 5 years, they would become proficient and return. The Buddha would then teach them about the Four Noble Truths. That person would go home, practice for a time, and then attain the first fruit. That is the formula, the standard model that we must still apply today. For us, this process might take 20 or 30 years and still not be complete. For example, when a layperson first comes to Buddhism, we must teach about cause and effect, karma, and morality. We must not be hasty. Even for you venerable monks, it is the same. After ordaining, you must still study morality very carefully. You cannot rush. Therefore, lessons on moral psychology, though they may seem basic, are a crucial foundation and are in perfect alignment with the Buddha's intent. Don't think that moral psychology is some new invention. Not at all. In the Nikāyas, the Buddha speaks of it constantly. However, he often speaks of it briefly because the people of ancient times had keen faculties. The Buddha spoke, and they understood. He spoke, and they understood immediately. As for us now, we have to expand one topic into an entire lecture. For instance, the topic of diligence requires a full lecture. The topic of jealousy requires a 1.5-hour lecture. In the old days, the Buddha mentioned all of these things, but he did so briefly and repeated them in countless discourses on morality. They didn't use the word morality back then. They spoke of the defilements of the mind, unwholesome states, or dark states in the mind. They were things like greed, jealousy, envy, conceit, arrogance, and laziness. These were the defilements of the mind that must be overcome and destroyed. The Buddha spoke of these moral issues again and again. So the moral topics we discuss today are not new. We are simply elaborating on them, delving deeper and speaking more carefully. Only when we see that a person understands cause and effect deeply and has performed many meritorious deeds, is it the right time for them to have the merit to practice meditation for liberation. Going too early will not be very successful. For instance, we now know the Buddha Dharma, we bow to the Buddha, we believe in cause and effect, we do good deeds, and we also sit in meditation. But we must remember that at this stage, meditation is secondary, while practicing morality and creating merit is primary. Remember that. Then, at some point after we have created merit for many years, 20, 30 years, and have become proficient, then meditation will naturally advance along with that merit. At that point, meditation becomes primary, and creating merit becomes secondary, as we proceed toward final liberation. When our mind is peaceful and liberated, the rest of our life is spent living completely for the sake of all beings. That is the third stage. But in the first stage of practice, we must balance merit-making and meditation. We adjust these two. We should never be attached to just one. It depends on the stage. If someone practices their whole life just creating merit but never turns toward meditation, that is a mistake. After death, they will only be reborn in a heavenly realm or as a wealthy and noble person. Conversely, if someone starts practicing and only focuses on meditation to become a Buddha quickly, without creating merit, that is also wrong. They will never succeed. The formula the Buddha gave from ancient times is that one must create merit, and then one can meditate. Some people can pass through both stages in a single lifetime. Others may need 5 or 10 years. For us today, we should just calmly walk both paths in parallel throughout our lives. In the beginning, we emphasize merit-making a bit more and meditation a bit less. When we notice meditation naturally arising in our minds, we know it is time to increase meditation a little and decrease the other a little. We watch our own mind to find the right balance, to know what to practice and when. Another characteristic of the Nikāyas is that many discourses were spoken by the Buddha's disciples and were later acknowledged by the Buddha and included in the canon. There are many discourses taught by Venerable Sariputta. One time he taught the Sutta on right view, knowing clearly what killing is, what morality is, what merit is, what the 12 links of dependent origination are, what the 4 noble truths are. He delivered a profoundly deep discourse. The Buddha praised it, and it was included in the Pāli. The Buddha said that Venerable Sariputta's wisdom was, he praised him as being extremely wise, intelligent, and excellent. Another time, in his old age, on the occasion of the inauguration of a new lecture hall for the Sakya clan, everyone invited the Buddha to give a Dharma talk. He said his back ached and he was tired, so he asked Venerable Ananda to teach in his place. Venerable Ananda then delivered a very unique discourse. Although he had not yet attained arahantship, he was very brilliant, and his teaching was acknowledged by the Buddha and also recorded in the canon. There are many such discourses. Then there is another characteristic. Some discourses were recorded after the Buddha's parinirvana. For instance, in the Madhura Sutta, a great minister asks, "The Blessed One has passed into parinirvana. Who is now the leader of the Sangha?" Venerable Ananda affirmed, "There is no leader of the Sangha. There is no single leader." According to legend, we often hear that it was Venerable Mahakassapa, right? Legend says that he presided over the first council. His prestige in the Sangha was immense, and people saw him as the leader. But in reality, the Buddha did not appoint a successor. The minister then asked, "If there is no leader, why do I see the Sangha living together so stably, virtuously, and harmoniously?" Venerable Ananda replied, "The Sangha relies on the Dharma, takes refuge in the Dharma, and takes refuge in the Vinaya, the code of discipline. But does the Sangha revere anyone?" "Yes," he said. "The Sangha reveres anyone who has accomplished the 10 desirable qualities, that is, those who have attained the path and have the ability to lead, explain, and teach the Dharma. Those are the ones the Sangha respects. But as for appointing a single person to lead the Sangha in his place, the Buddha did not do that. That sutta clearly confirms it. For this reason, the Theravada monks in Sri Lanka never believed the story that the Buddha transmitted his robe and bowl to Venerable Kassapa, who later transmitted them to Venerable Ananda. There is no such thing. So the history of the 33 Zen patriarchs is not recognized by the Southern tradition because right from the beginning, the Madhura Sutta affirmed that there is no single leader. Here we should pay attention to this point. Where does the strength of Buddhism lie? Where does it lie? It lies in the doctrine, not in the organization. And the Buddha himself established it this way. He did not create an organization. He left behind a doctrine. So, without an organization, is Buddhism weak or strong? It is weak. We must admit this. We can say this without worrying about offending anyone. Clearly, Buddhism is weak organizationally. It is only strong when, in a particular era, a great master appears and brings the doctrine powerfully into the world. In that era, Buddhism becomes stronger for a time. But if no one follows to continue the work, Buddhism declines again. The strength of Buddhism is the strength of its doctrine, not its organization. Other religions, lacking a doctrine with such inherent strength, must rely on either 1, blind faith, or 2, a very tight organization. So sometimes they can be rotten on the inside, but from the outside, their organization still appears very strong. That is the case for some. But Buddhism has no such formal structure. When it is weak, it appears weak. When it is strong, it becomes strong again. It is all thanks to the doctrine. For example, later in your lives, if one of you becomes the head of the district Sangha, and you find the monks there are not harmonious, arguing, and unable to find consensus, how would you handle it? If you misunderstand Buddhism, you might try to solve the problem of disharmony through organizational means. You might call a meeting and say, "Okay, we need to elect someone for this position to handle this matter, and someone for that position to handle that matter." You might think that such a meeting will solve the disharmony. But to solve it that way is not in accordance with the spirit of Buddhism. What is the right way? You must find a way to teach, to call the Sangha together for a Dharma talk. If you cannot teach it yourself, invite a venerable of high virtue to do so. The solution must come only through the doctrine, so that everyone can look into their own minds, see their own faults, and transform themselves from within. Then, naturally, the Sangha in that region will become harmonious and united again. That is the Buddhist way. Therefore, while we must have some organization, we must always remember that the organization is the branch, while the doctrine is the root. That is the spirit of Buddhism. For instance, this morning I went to see the teaching nun master at Thien Phuc Monastery. She was concerned that when dividing the nuns into groups for assignments, the difference in skill level between the capable and the weak was causing conflict. The skilled nuns were confident and did the work, while the weaker ones cried because their ideas were dismissed and not included in the final essay. They felt hurt. The nun master felt helpless and was thinking of abandoning the group work method next time. I told her, "Sister, don't worry. Keep doing it. They have to practice facing these kinds of problems. Only then will they be able to handle the real work of the Buddha Dharma later on. If they retreat as soon as things get difficult, they will never be able to cooperate and get things done. In such cases, we should not change the organization to solve the problem. Abandoning group work would mean changing the organization in the hope of fixing the issue, and that is the wrong approach. You should keep the collective work but address the internal state of mind. Why are you sad? Why are you crying? Let's talk about it. We explain again. Is it because you can't contribute ideas? There are countless ways to contribute. You can wash the clothes for those doing the writing. You can stand and fan the mosquitoes away. For them, pour them water. You can still express your inner heart of supporting your spiritual siblings, even without contributing an idea. That is still meritorious. The important thing about the assignment is not the final paper itself, but the attitude of cooperation. And within this cooperation is silent sacrifice. No one will mention your name. For example, even if one person is the most skilled in the group and contributes the most, when I grade the paper, I don't know who that was, and I don't need to know. I don't want to know. I only want to know if the essay is good, to evaluate the group as a whole, and I don't want to single out any individual. So, even the person who is weak, if their spirit of supporting their teammates is strong, they are still highly evaluated. Here, for the sake of the collective, we must overcome our personal opinions to work together effectively. And for the skilled person in the group, they must overcome their arrogance and not look down on those who are weaker, but still treat them with respect. So, when a problem arises, we use the doctrine to solve it, not the organization. The organization is just the branch. That is how we handle matters in the Buddha Dharma. So you venerable monks, remember this for the future. When you encounter a difficult situation, you must use morality and doctrine to address the problem first. Don't rush to hold elections and reorganize. Another characteristic of the Nikāyas is this: the 3 supreme knowledges, the 6 supernormal powers, and other psychic phenomena are confirmed many times. Many times. Some people say the Nikāyas have few psychic powers. They are wrong. In the Nikaya scriptures, the Buddha's psychic powers are mentioned very frequently, and not in some vague, mystical way. For example, a wanderer named Vakagata once said to the Buddha, "Venerable Gautama, some people claim that you are all-knowing and all-seeing, that you possess complete knowledge and vision at all times, when walking, standing, sleeping, and waking, that your knowledge is constantly and uninterruptedly present." He then asked, "Are those who say this slandering you, venerable sir?" The Buddha replied, "To say that is to slander the Tathagata." Why? Because the spiritual state of being mindful even while asleep was achieved by many heretics at the time. Many later Chinese Zen masters also achieved it, seeing the nature while awake, seeing the nature while asleep. Normally, when we sleep, we are lost in delusion, right? But someone who has attained deep meditation knows clearly even while sleeping. We cannot explain this with words. One must practice and realize it to know. But when asked if this claim was slander, the Buddha said yes. Why? The Buddha said one must put it this way to avoid slander. The Tathagata, when he wishes, can recall his countless past lives. When he wishes, he can observe the karmic unfolding of all sentient beings. He possesses the wisdom that transcends the cycle of birth and death, and he abides in the taint-free liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom. To speak thus is not to slander the Tathagata. He was making the point that this is the goal of Buddhism. To merely achieve a state of constant mindfulness, even during sleep, is still very low. The founder of the Nikaya sect had achieved that state, and the Buddha dismissed it as not being very high. Only when one has attained the three supreme knowledges is it truly significant. That is the kind of psychic power the Buddha confirmed. The ability of Venerable Moggallana to disappear from this realm and reappear in a celestial realm in a flash is mentioned again and again. Or there were times a practitioner would be struggling with an inner obstacle, and the Buddha would suddenly appear before him, resolve his difficulty, and the practitioner would attain the path on the spot. Cases like that are mentioned many times, so the issue of psychic powers is discussed quite frequently. Another characteristic of the Nikāyas is that supernatural worlds, hells, realms of hungry, ghosts, Pita, yakshas, and celestial heavens are familiar parts of the landscape. Devas come to visit the Buddha, and the Buddha speaks of the hell realms and the realms of hungry ghosts again and again. So the supernatural world is a very real thing that the Buddha confirmed repeatedly. And what are yakshas? When we hear that word, we usually think of demons or monsters with terrifying faces, fangs and claws, right? No. In the scriptures, yakshas are not demons. They are beings similar to devas, a kind of nature spirit. And they are beautiful, especially the female yakshas. As for the male yakshas, I don't know if they are as handsome as you venerable monks, but the female ones are very beautiful. They also frequently came to meet the Buddha and protect the Dharma. So from now on, if anyone asks, you have the right to say, I am as handsome as a yaksha. Worlds like that appear often. For example, a yaksha named Satagiri appeared and told the Buddha that one time in the Tvatisa heaven, he saw the devas gathering to discuss the Dharma. So we should remember that the heavenly realms have a great deal of Dharma activity, much like a pure land. A Brahma god from a higher heaven descended to the devas in Sakka's heaven to give a discourse on the Dharma and praise the Buddha. The yaksha appeared and recounted this story to the Buddha. So yakshas are not fang demons. Another characteristic we see is this. Some discourses tell of a bhikkhu who attains the path after a long period of diligent practice. Other discourses tell of a bhikkhu who attains the path immediately after a single Dharma talk from the Buddha. Both cases are described many times. For instance, there was the story of Nikaya. One time, the Buddha was staying at the home of a fire-worshipping Brahmin. The man must have had a karmic connection, as he respected the Buddha and made him a straw mattress to keep warm. Today, if the Buddha came to visit us, we would probably offer him a fine, modern mattress, but in those days, a straw mattress was a great luxury. The Buddha lay on his right side, and the straw, unlike modern foam, did not spring back, so it held the impression of his body. In the morning, the Buddha took his bowl and went into the village for alms, leaving the impression on the straw. A wandering ascetic came by, saw it, and said, "It seems a diligent practitioner lay here. There is one, the Samama Gautama, who is praised by all as an enlightened Buddha." The Brahmin householder flew into a rage. "Gautama is someone I never want to meet," he shouted. "Never even want to hear his name. He is a destroyer of life." The householder cautioned him, "Be careful what you say. He is a person praised by many." But the man held to his opinion. At that moment, the Buddha was meditating under a nearby tree and heard everything. He slowly returned to the house and met the ascetic. He asked, "Is it true that you said I am a destroyer of life?" "Yes, that is right." The Buddha asked, "Is it because I teach that people should not indulge in worldly pleasures, but should instead devote their minds to practice for liberation? Is it because I say this that you call me a destroyer of life?" "Yes, that is right." From a distance, the Buddha had heard him and knew instantly the root of his animosity. The Buddha then taught him the Dharma. After the discourse was over, the man followed the Buddha and ordained. The Buddha truly had a charm. He practiced diligently for some time and became an arahant. There are many discourses like that. But there are also discourses where, during the talk itself, all the bhikkhus in attendance attain arahantship. Some people would listen to a single discourse and attain stream entry, some the second fruit, some the third. A few discourses even mention attaining the fourth fruit of arahantship on the spot. For instance, when Venerable Sariputta was walking down the road, he heard the elder Assaji recite a short verse. Right there, on the spot, he attained the fruit of stream entry. He then went to find his friend, Venerable Moggallana, told him the verse, and Moggallana also attained stream entry right there. They then sought out the Buddha to ask for ordination. 7 days later, both of them attained arahantship through meditation. As soon as they arrived, the Buddha said, "Here comes a pair of friends with wonderful merit and conditions. Come, bhikkhus." He appointed them as his chief disciples. These two ordained after many others, but because of their karmic affinity and capacity, the Buddha elevated them. He was not attached to seniority. At this point, you venerable monks should pay attention. Do not automatically think that a disciple who ordained before you should be the leader. You must learn the lesson of the Buddha. Even if someone comes later, if they have ability and virtue, they can be elevated. Do not be attached to that. In the Nikāyas, we see that the culture and literature of that time often used concrete similes to illustrate abstract reasoning. For example, the Buddha once used the image of a net to represent morality. Or he would say, just as a great sea serpent is small when it lives in a lake, but grows larger and larger as it moves to a great river and then to the ocean, so too a bhikkhu who relies on morality and the Eightfold Path will find their wholesome qualities growing stronger day by day. A concrete image is presented first, making the abstract doctrine that follows easier to accept. That is the genius of it. Some similes from that time are difficult for us to understand. The Buddha described the first jhana, meditative absorption, as being like a bather in a tub with a skilled bath attendant who expertly mixes bath powder with water and works it into a ball, so that the entire ball is pervaded and saturated with moisture, yet does not drip. So too, the meditator pervades his body with the bliss born of seclusion. Or there is the example of the Ganges River rising. In the south of my country, we have a saying for a flood. The water jumps onto the banks. But 2,000 years from now, people might not understand that saying. In the Buddha's time, the simile was that the water rose so high a crow could stand on the bank and drink from the river. The imagery is different. Or think back to the story of Upāli, who said he would challenge the Buddha like a wrestler who grabs his opponent by the head and neck and throws him back and forth. Using an image like that is also very distinctive. In the literature of the Nikāyas, we encounter many such strange and vivid similes that we no longer use today. Verses and poetry are also very common. Many discourses are spoken entirely in verse. A person would come and ask the Buddha a question in verse, and the Buddha would reply in verse immediately. He was so at ease with wisdom. We today don't have the capacity to compose poetry on the spot. If someone came to me with a question in verse, I would have to ask for 3 days to reply. But at that time, as soon as he was asked, the Buddha would reply in verse. Absolutely brilliant. The language in the Nikāyas is often concise and condensed to be easily remembered, because there was no way to write things down. One couldn't speak at length as we are doing now. No one would remember. Every sentence had to be potent, clear, and brief so the listener could retain it. The rambling style we use today would have been impossible. Now, let's talk a little about the proper attitude for studying the Nikāyas. First, we must have the utmost respect for them, because these are the authentic words from the golden mouth of the Buddha, a blessed one to whom we have dedicated our entire lives. So we must deeply cherish, revere, and respect his authentic teachings. We must not look down on them, even though there are linguistic differences and obscure passages due to the vast gulf of time. We must bow our heads and respect this Dharma treasure. Second, we cannot read the Nikāyas like a novel. We must read slowly, word by word, sentence by sentence, to contemplate and find the true meaning. Sometimes we must read a short passage and then pause to reflect on it before we can understand. We can't just, for example, there is a passage. The uninstructed worldling perceives earth as earth, thinks of himself in relation to earth, delights in earth. I say that person does not fully understand earth. The arahant understands earth as earth, does not think of himself in relation to earth, does not delight in earth. I say that person fully understands earth. When you read that, you must pause and slowly try to understand it. You can't just read on without understanding. If you do, your mind will either become stressed or you will fall asleep. One must study the Nikāyas slowly like that. Third, one must put in the effort to practice. Only then can one understand the Nikāyas more deeply. For example, when the Buddha says, when a bhikkhu walks, he is mindful. When he eats and drinks, he is mindful. When he urinates and defecates, he is mindful. When he speaks and when he is silent, he is mindful. Don't just learn that sentence as a theory. You must practice it. Then, you venerable monks, when you have practiced it, and you later explain that passage to others, your words will have a powerful vitality that inspires them to practice as well. But if we just learn it intellectually, oh, that's easy to understand, just be mindful. And later someone asks us, we just repeat what we've learned, our words will be like an empty shell. No one will practice from listening to our lecture, because we ourselves lack the inner strength of practice. Therefore, studying the Nikāyas is difficult, but we must try to practice. Then we will see how immensely beneficial it is. The sentences that seem obscure and distant hold immense and fundamental value if you practice them. This is from my own experience. The teachings that seem basic are often immeasurably valuable. There must be practice. Another thing, we often recall how the Buddha spoke of the handful of leaves. The leaves in the forest are many, but the leaves in his hand are few. This means that what he taught did not exhaust all the truth in the universe. This opens the door for future development. Later, we have the right to speak of many new things based on the foundation the Buddha has laid to continue discovering the truths that still pervade the cosmos. Thanks to this, Buddhism will continue to develop. It's just as I said before. We need to teach new and engaging discourses to nurture devotion for the old ones. If we cannot develop new insights, the old Buddhism will also disappear. Therefore, we must always be searching for new things. But these new things are not necessarily better than the old things. They simply nurture the old things. We must continue to teach the Dharma, to continue to explore so that the entire tradition of Buddhism can continue to exist. So, in the Nikāyas, we see a Buddhism that is at once practical, simple, and transcendent. It must have all three of these qualities. We should never be biased towards one side. Many people read the Nikāyas and say, the Nikāyas present a practical Buddhism. I say that person has not yet understood Buddhism. Reading the Nikāyas, one must see a Buddhism that is practical and historical, with a Buddha who dons his robe and walks through the world on his bare feet. Very close, very simple, but also very transcendent. Today, no one can do what he did. Interact with celestial beings, know countless past lives, possess psychic powers. Those things are incredibly transcendent. Buddhism is practical, simple, and transcendent. It is not just mystical and transcendent, nor is it only practical and simple. To say either of those is wrong. It must be all three to be the Buddhism that we understand correctly from the Nikāyas. One last thing we can say is this. From ancient times to the present, in the entire history of humanity, no founder of a religion has left behind teachings that are as profound and as voluminous as the Buddha. Not one religion. If in the future there are people who say profound things, it is certain they will have relied to a great extent on the teachings of the Buddha. There has never been anything like it in history, so we can say that we are incredibly fortunate to be disciples of the Buddha, to follow the path of Buddhism. Because on this path, we have come very close to the truth. The remaining task to fully realize that truth depends on our own practice. And having been so fortunate, having been given this path, we must know what to do. Next, to dedicate our entire lives to bringing this truth, this doctrine, to all people, to help rebuild this world, which is sinking in the darkness of selfishness and cruelty. We must strive to make this earth, this world, and the people of today become gentle, moral, and civilized.